The day after the regular season ended, they went to Phillip Rivers, and this was said on my show. And by the way, you can go on JAKIB Media's channel, and you can hear what Frank said here on the National Football Show. He said this the day after the season ended for them, because they went on to the playoffs. They went like this. Okay, we're not going into the draft. We're targeting Carson Wentz. They knew immediately that Philadelphia had lost their patience with him on what they saw in that final game. Frank said on my show, we knew immediately we wanted him. Do you know that Philadelphia in this entire offseason was unraveling in front of everyone media-wise? We're going to have an open quarterback competition. As soon as that was said, they knew they didn't have to surrender a first-rounder. And you know why they knew that? Nobody offered the Eagles a first-round draft choice for Carson Wentz. Philadelphia shot themselves in the foot. Moving along here, Dan Cilio, in for Jody here on Birds 365 with John McMullen. John, we're talking about, obviously the biggest question is whether or not the quarterback's the dude or not going forward, okay? But I also do think this. I think the relationship between the quarterback and head coach is also going to be something to watch. I mean, Nick Sirianni, this is his first time up to the plate as a head coach. I've always told people, and having talked to former head coaches that made that transition from being a coordinator to being a head coach, it's almost the same kind of transition that a athlete goes from being a college guy to being an NFL guy. And when you're just used to having one-sided headsets on, you're just listening to the defensive guys, you're listening to DBs, linebacker coaches, you're hyper-focused on one part of your team, your position, and what the unit's doing on that side of the ball, defense or offense. When you're a head coach, there's a reason why you have two switches, offense, defense. And the head coach goes back and forth and is monitoring what the coaches are doing. You know, Coach Jimmy Johnson told me his most useless day ever was on game day because his assistant coaches were the guys that were running the football team. Jimmy's job coaching the team was Monday through Saturday. Sundays, those were his assistant coaches. Nick's got to learn that, and he's got to understand there's two or three sides to this team: special teams, defensive side of the ball, dealing with your offense, and not being so hyper-focused on just the relationship with the quarterback. It's going to be interesting to see how his assistant coaches and him all work together and how they work with Jalen in developing that. So that's going to be part of this growing process that you're talking about. And like you said, me looking at it from 35,000 feet, 5 to 7 wins. But the Eagles really, like you said, if you want to really get into the weeds of this, they're going to be looking at all these relationships, how Nick acts as a head coach, his coaching staff. There's probably going to be 40% change and turnover next year in his coaching staff because some guys are not going to fit into the mix, just like guys don't fit onto the roster.
You know, it's interesting, Dan, because you bring up Jimmy and you're talking about a CEO coach.
Yes.
Like if I were an owner, I would want a CEO coach. I talk about this all the time. If I'm hiring somebody to be the head coach of my football team, I want him to be the head coach of my football team. I look at Sean McVay. You know, he's the template for the modern NFL coach. You know that. Everybody wants Sean McVay. Everybody wants the next Sean McVay. Oh, you had coffee with Sean McVay? Come interview with me. Sean McVay's the guy in this league. I remember when he first got to Los Angeles, he wouldn't even pay attention when the defense was on the field. You know, they had Wade Phillips at the time. He would go sit with Jared Goff. He'd be on the bench talking, wouldn't even be looking at the game. I don't want that type of coach. And too many teams in this league are going in that direction. I was always told, you've probably heard this, if you're hiring a scheme, you've done it wrong when you're talking about coaches, because somebody's going to catch up to your scheme no matter what. So here's my biggest concern with Nick Sirianni. I brought up Sean McVay. He had Wade Phillips. You look at Matt Nagy. He had Vic Fangio at the time in Chicago. Doug Pederson here had Jim Schwartz as a first-time coach. On and on and on. Even last year, Joe Judge had Jason Garrett, who coached the Cowboys for all those years. You know who Nick Sirianni's right-hand man is? Kevin Patullo. I mean, here's the other thing I've heard from every coach I've ever talked to, Dan, and you're closer to a lot of coaches than me. Every single one of them, when they get the big chair for the first time, says, man, I didn't know how much stuff I got to do that doesn't involve football. You know, the logistics, the schedules, the media stuff. You know, you're talking, everybody's in and out of your office. It's not about exit. You got to manage a whole team. It's a really big job. So that's my concern with the Eagles. Maybe Nick's great at it, but boy, man, I'd like to have a veteran sounding board who's done it before. That seems to be the successful template around the league if you're going with a young head coach.
And there's no doubt that's what they're doing in Jacksonville. Okay. Urban Meyer's not going to be sitting around coaching Trevor Lawrence. This is going to be done by committee. The reason that he's won, when he was at Bowling Green, Utah, Florida, he was a CEO type of coach. Do you know who his confidant is? It's Jimmy Johnson. He's had numerous conversations on how Coach Johnson became a success. You know, all the hammerhead people are always talking about why Tebow's down in Jacksonville. It's got nothing to do with making the team. Do you know why Tebow's in the room? And I'll give you another, for instance, on what Jimmy did when he's first year in Dallas. Coach Johnson brought every single guy that he had ever been around or coached in his entire life into the team, including yours truly. When players in that building were asking me, what's Jimmy expecting? I told them, if you think this roster that you see today is going to be here next year, he'll turn 90% over of this roster, including my ass. He doesn't care, but he wants you to know inside the building. Tebow's in that building to let every single veteran know the culture is going to be this. This is what Meyer expects. That's why the coaches that have been brought in have Urban Meyer connections. That's why everybody that's telling these players, this is what we're going to do. Hell, he's even got Shea Khan, the owner of the team, investing all types of money into the new facilities, and he's inspired him that way because he's running it like a CEO, like you said. You know, there's no question that transition is going to be something to keep an eye on here with Sirianni. And to me, you mentioned Sean McVay. I'll give you a quick story here, John. I knew, Sean McVay from my Tampa days because John McVay, if you remember the name, John McVay was the great talent evaluator. And he was the guy that was working with Bill Walsh and Eddie DeBartolo and building that great dynasty. I even think John may have been the head coach of the Giants for a little bit when my uncle hired him as the New York Giants head coach, Andy Robustelli. I think Andy hired him. I think he was there for a small stint. Anyway, so he has football background, and he used to be a ball boy for John Gruden. And then I believe he gets a coordinating job somewhere. I think it was in Washington. Am I right? When he was in Washington?
Yeah, he was in Washington.
He was in Washington. Stan Kroenke called John Gruden and said, do you want the job? Gruden said, I'm not ready yet. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. However, you should take a look at this guy here in Sean McVay. Very young. And then Bruce Allen got on the phone. And Bruce Allen and John Gruden, those are the two people that got Sean McVay that job. And the number one thing that was told to Sean, hey, Sean, listen, this transition is not as easy as you say, okay? John Gruden was the guy that said, if you're not going to be on that side of the football, get the most experienced defensive guy you could possibly get, and the guy I suggest is Wade Phillips. That was a hand-picked from the front office of Les Snead and Kevin Demoff there in that Rams organization. They were making sure that they had it set up for him that he can make that transition. And guess what happened? After he felt comfortable on being a head coach, they jettisoned Wade.
Yeah.
And he felt a little bit better. So to me, Nick should have had a little bit more power people in the building. But then again, we go back to who's in charge of hiring and who's in charge of firing. Do you really think that Nick Sirianni in any way had any kind of say in who his coaches were going to be on that coaching staff? Or do you think it was Howie Roseman who had the majority of the influence? If he runs the roster, John, he's got to also be running the coaching staff too. And when you have that dynamic, that's not good.
That's the interesting thing, Dan. And I will never be able to understand this. Look, and maybe it just comes down to Doug didn't want to do it, but they didn't give Doug the autonomy with his coaching staff. With Nick, day one, he had more autonomy. I'm not saying he has complete autonomy. They wanted to keep Jeff Stoutland. They got it done. And by the way, that's a good thing. And then the receivers coach, Aaron Moorhead, which, to be honest, between you and me, they were looking for somebody else. They couldn't get somebody else, and they circled back around to Aaron Moorhead. Everybody else is a Nick guy. Everybody else has a relationship with Nick Sirianni. Kevin Petullo, as I mentioned, is going to be his right-hand man. He's the passing game coordinator. He was in Indianapolis with him. But I will say this, that is really, really strange from the Eagles' perspective. To me, this is completely counterintuitive. So I'm going to throw this to you. Doug obviously was a longtime player, we know. Then he went to coach in high school for a little bit. And then Andy brought him back in the league as an assistant, Andy Reid. Obviously, Andy had tremendous success. And when Andy went to Kansas City, he brought Doug Pederson along. So Doug's entire history as an assistant coach was with Andy Reid, first in Philadelphia, then in Kansas City. What the Eagles said behind the scenes about Nick Sirianni, well, he's been in more spots. He's developed more relationships, as you like to say, Dan. Maybe that's true, but why are you penalizing Doug Peterson? How do you lose a job in this league? I mean, you're not successful. You hop around. Sometimes you get promoted as an assistant, but how are you going to blame a guy? What is Doug Peterson going to do? Say, oh, I'm going to leave Andy Reid. I'm going to leave maybe the second best coach of the generation so I can get more experience with a bunch of nothings? It doesn't make sense to me. It's counterintuitive. The guy knows football. The guy knows people. Let him have the coaches he wants. And then, Dan, then if he bails, okay. Then he could say, oh, I was right, then fire him. But give him the opportunity. Am I crazy?
No, because it's like saying this, well, I'm not going to hire anybody from Apple. You know, you were there at Apple for 25 years, you know, and I'm going to penalize you because you didn't have 57 jobs.
Yeah. It makes no sense to me. I
don't want a guy that's been popping around on 57 different jobs. Let me say this to you, and I tell people this all the time. The gold standard in how you run a franchise is in Pittsburgh. They've had 3 head football coaches since 1969 when we put Neil Armstrong on the moon.
Yeah.
More presidents and
they're all going to the Hall of Fame.
Every one of them.
There, Mike's going.
How about this one too, John? Think about the free agents they've brought in the last 50 years that you went like this. Wow. Jerome Bettis, everybody thought he was done in Los Angeles when he was there. Give me like gigantic free agents that they bring in. They really don't bring them in because you know what they do? They invest in their coaches. They invest in their talent. They invest in people. They're patient. They're not going to knee-jerk react. They're going to get involved when they need to get involved. Kevin Colbert works with Mike Tomlin. He doesn't act like his boss, like how he acts like the boss of the coaches that are in Philadelphia. You need to work with even Chris Ballard. Look at Chris Ballard and what he's done in Indianapolis. He's working with Frank. He's not commanding Frank. Frank, what do you need? Who do you want? I'll give you – I had the most interesting comments said by Frank Wright when it came to Carson Wentz. Let me throw this at you here. The day after the regular season ended, They went to Phillip Rivers, and this was said on my show. And by the way, you can go on JAKIB Media's channel, and you can hear what Frank said here on the National Football Show. He said this the day after the season ended for them, because they went on to the playoffs. They went like this. Okay, we're not going into the draft. We're targeting Carson Wentz. They knew immediately that Philadelphia had lost their patience with him on what they saw in that final game. Frank said on my show, we knew immediately we wanted him. Do you know that Philadelphia in this entire offseason was unraveling in front of everyone media-wise? We're going to have an open quarterback competition. As soon as that was said, they knew they didn't have to surrender a first-rounder. And you know why they knew that? Nobody offered the Eagles a first-round draft choice for Carson Wentz. Philadelphia shot themselves in the foot by night. Look at what they got for Matthew Stafford. What the hell has he ever won? What has he done up there? He's a great talent. Everybody keeps telling me that. Okay, well, he didn't really translate that into wins. They got multiple first rounds off this thing. So you may now he ends up going there. They go to the AFC Championship game. It turns into a first rounder. I get that. But they knew immediately, John, that they were targeting this guy. They wanted Carson Wentz from day one. And that's why I kept posting on my Twitter page. I kept going like this. They're working on a deal. They're working on a deal. I knew they were working on a deal because Frank was telling me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Eagles lost leverage for a number of reasons, Dan. I think you also have to be fair. I mean, you mentioned Matthew Stafford. Yeah. Matthew is going to get a little deference because Detroit's a bad organization. We know that. It has been their bad team for a long time. He does have talent. There's not that terrible film on Matthew Stafford. He always played pretty well. You could say he didn't live up to expectations, but there was horrible film on Carson Wentz. I mean, he played really poorly last year. I can't even explain it. To this day, I can't explain it. I mean, people talk about the injuries. Okay, he wasn't the same Carson Wentz post ACL, LCL, but he played pretty well in 2018 and 2019. He played okay. I had felt personally, here's where I was. I felt that Carson was probably in the 12-13 range as far as grading quarterbacks in this league. And maybe if he had a good year, he can get to 9 or 10. I thought he was settling in as that guy, which, to be honest, was a bit of a disappointment prior to the injuries when he looked like he was going to be a superstar. Then he just fell off the table from a mechanics standpoint, from a confidence standpoint, ball security, everything. So you did have this bad tape on Carson Wentz that you didn't have on a player like Matthew Stafford. So I think that impacts what you're going to get back as well. And then, yes, they definitely screwed up the relationship part of it. It became clear to everybody around the league he wasn't coming back. He was going to force himself out. Again, the record for dead money in this league, Dan, was $22 million. And by the way, the Rams said it with Jared Goff. I think it was $22.8 million. And that's why guys like me and Andrew Brandt and all the money guys said they're not going to eat that money. That's not Jeffrey Lurie. Jeffrey Lurie's not going to eat $33.8 million and set that precedent. He did, not because he wanted to, because he had no other option.
Yeah, but John, that new CBA allows owners now to defer a lot of that money. Okay? And now when that kicks in this year, you can defer that because that's what happened with the Rams. When Todd Gurley and that they owed him when he left Los Angeles, they still owed him $25 million. They owed Clay Matthews another $18 million. Yeah. And what that new CBA does, it's team friendly, so you can defer money out. Yes, it's dead money, counts against your cap, but you're deferring a lot of that money out now to where it's conducive for these guys to eat a lot of this money. That's why down in Atlanta, there was a debate whether or not Arthur Blank was going to go like this. Are we going to sit and eat $62 million of Matt Ryan's deal. They didn't want to do it because it was too much. And quite frankly, I don't think Matt Ryan's the issue in Atlanta.
No.
I think it's their sorry-ass defense. That was the issue there. So I think he's probably going to have a rebound year with this new head coach. So that gives you a little bit more of the autonomy to be able to do that when you're talking about dead money on the, like you said before without that new CBA, that was a crusher, man. And you didn't see teams really making these moves. But now you're seeing teams eating this money now because they can spread that money out over an extended period of time if they make a mistake on a free agent.
Well, I got to tell you, you're right. But in this case, short term, it kills you because when people think about the Eagles and say,
especially in a rebuild, John.
Yeah, they can win 12 games. Here's how Brandt described it to me. Here's how Andrew. You have all these fantasy football leagues and fantasy football people. Some of them are monetary related. You get like $200 and you get to build a team with $200. Well, imagine everybody in your little fantasy league has $200 and you got to start with 166.
Right.
There it is. That's what's going on with the Eagles. That's what that dead money hit means. So it was more about moving on from the relationship that was fractured because of the front office, let's be honest. And I circle all the way back to Orlovsky comments. He wasn't talking about Jalen Hurts. He was talking about the Eagles' decision to draft a player at 53 that fractured the relationship with Carson Wentz, which I think is fair.
How about this too, John? You mentioned you start with like 166 and other teams are playing at 200. Do you know where that affects you the most? In your special teams.
Yeah.
When you don't have that additional 25%, that comes down to special teams. And how many times have we seen teams, like look at the Cowboys. The Cowboys are paying $42 million to Dak Prescott. Watch this here. They're paying $18 million, basically 20, to Ezekiel Elliott. They're paying another 20 to Amari Cooper. My God almighty, you got $80 million of your $186 million salary cap. Wrapped up $80 million of that money is in 3 players. What about your O-line? What about the defense that was a sieve a year ago? Hell, I haven't even got to the backups, and I haven't even got to special teams. That's why the Cowboys are top heavy, and their cap makes no sense right now. Where people are going like this. Well, the Cowboys are going to be, a real play. I'm like, no, they're not. Their salary cap is all over the joint. That goes here to this question here: where do the Eagles fit in the NFC East this coming 2021 season, you think?
Well, I think definitely you go in. Look, I say with Dak Prescott healthy, the Cowboys have a top 5 offense. I mean, they were putting up historic numbers. People forget Dak was the final 3 games before he got hurt, Dan. He was at like 426, 470 something, and then over 500. I mean, they were throwing the ball all over the place with Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup. Now they have their offensive line back, top 5 offensive line. That's a top 5 offense. Washington, top 5 defense. Chase Young, Montez Sweat, Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, good secondary, good linebackers. Jamin Davis is their first-round pick. They're really good on the defensive side of the ball. So I think you have the haves and the have-nots, and I put quotes on that. Look, I don't think Dallas or Washington is a significant contender, but if they stay healthy, the NFC East, the top of the NFC East is going to be a little bit better than it has been. And then you have the bottom, and that's the Giants and the Eagles. Giants did everything for Daniel Jones. Got him weapons, Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, Saquon Barkley's back, but they didn't address the offensive line, Dan. The offensive line still stinks. You got to start with the offensive line. And the Eagles, look, too many questions about the coach and the quarterback. I think it's fair to say that.
How about this? This is where I go with these guys. You mentioned Dak. They were still 1-4, though, John. I mean,
yeah, they weren't winning. But the defense was historically bad.
Historically bad. I mean, what did the Browns? They run the ball for 300 yards against them in Dallas.
Yeah.
I mean, so even even with the signing of Dak, I say this. Did the Cowboys really get better? Where? Where did they get better? The kid from Penn State, he's a rookie. You really think a rookie's going to roll in to that defense? And they keep telling me about Dan Quinn, the new defensive coordinator in Dallas. Excuse me, outside of the 1 year when Dan Quinn was the head coach in Atlanta, I think they finished 9th. The rest of them were like 26th, 28th ranked. I mean, they keep telling me that this is going to be some sort of injection and that this new Dallas Cowboy defense, you know what their big mistake was a year ago when under Mike Nolan, they went from a 43 to a 34. They didn't have the personnel. They were getting run all over. The thing was so chaotic, and you didn't have a head coach putting his foot down saying, we don't have 43 personnel, 4 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, in case those out there don't know what a 43 is. And they were not set up for that defense. That's why they couldn't get after the quarterback. They couldn't get anybody on the ground. That division, to me, comes down to defense and not offense. The 2 best defenses in that division are the Giants and Washington. Washington, in my opinion, has the best roster in that division, top to bottom. Now, the quarterback position is obviously a major concern. However, do you know that Ryan Fitzpatrick has more passing yards than Terry Bradshaw?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this guy has put a resume together that is stunning. Yeah. And I know it's been on 72 different teams, but I mean, if they get any consistency like they did in the last 2 years in Miami with Fitzpatrick, and if he could play like he did in New York with the Jets, that football team could win 10 games because of their defense and what they do on that side of the ball. Getting rid of Trent Williams was a colossal disaster for that franchise. I mean, how do you let the best offensive tackle go in the league? I mean, it still is mind-numbing on how you do that. Plus, you have the whole situation with Daniel Snyder. I don't know if that bleeds down because it's been a chaotic franchise. He's the James Dolan.
I think they're used to it. Yeah, I think
you know what? You know what, John? He's the James Dolan of the NFL. He's a horrible owner, but maybe him being away from it is going to be beneficial to that team. I look at Washington and New York with the best defenses. I still am suspect on Dallas,
you're right.
The Eagles are in transition.
I'll say this last thing, Dan. I'll say about the Cowboys. They don't need to be a top tier defense. You're right. They need to get me to 20. Can they get to 20? They can't be 32. They can't be historically bad. Can they get to 20, even 22, even 23? If they can, Teron Smith is back. Zach Martin's back. La'el Collins is back. The receivers, the running back, the quarterback, they're going to be able to score 35 points. So you can give up 30 if you're scoring 35. You can't give up 40. So just know you can't be 32nd. Just get me to 20, and that could be a good football team.
I say this to you too, real quick here about Pederson. Let me ask you this: you think in 2022, him and Eric Bieniemy are the number 1 candidates when it comes to NFL head coaching candidates that are going to be open? Could you see him in Dallas?
Yeah, depending if Mike Ball's on a space. Yeah, I could see Doug anywhere. I'm going to use my stupid big water bottles, the Lombardi Trophy. If you can slam that down, I
throw the rings down, right? Yeah. Throw the rings on the table.
I think the only reason Doug didn't get a job this year is because of the timing. He was fired so late. Everybody was in the process. They were already deciding on coaches. But I mean, think about it. No disrespect to Robert Saleh or Arthur Smith or Brandon Staley. Who the hell are these guys? I got a freaking Lombardi Trophy.
I thought he was going to land with the Jets because of the relationship with the GM
so did I.
And the Eagles. I really thought he was going to be in that conversation. I think he's going to be and get this, Pete Carroll's going to be 71 years old next year.
Yeah.
I mean,
and Doug's from Washington. That's where he's from. He's from Bellingham, Washington. He would love to coach the Seahawks. That was another team. People were talking about him, Dan. I don't know if you remember being the offensive coordinator out there, because that's the one place he would probably go to be a coordinator because he loves it out there.
I would love to. I can't wait to see what he does. So not too much pain today, right?
Nah, it was great. I love Dan Cilia. I'm thrilled you were here, man. Thrilled you were here.
Kind of knocked it around a little bit. JB, you know, Jerome told me all about Philly, and hey, real quick, I got a Buddy Ryan story. So I come in, I just get cut from the Buccaneers. Jerome played a horrible game on Monday night against the Giants. Buddy Ryan, I walk over. He looks over at me and he goes, "You're with him, right?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "You think I want another one of that guys around here? Get the my." I'm like, I just got off the airplane and I'm going like this. What the hell was that? He goes, Ryan goes, "You think I want another one of you guys?" He loved JB though. Hey, John, I appreciate, man, you having me in the house. Thank you so much, man. Thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Dan. Thrilled.
Hey.
First 365. Jody will be back Monday. Dan Sileo, the National Football Show, 4 to 6 right here on the JAKIB Media channel. Birds 365. We'll be back Monday. Jody, it'll be back at Mac. But much thanks to Dan Sileo, who's a legend. I got up 225 once in my life, Dan. You got up 540. There we are.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.